Whether you are in the midst of growth or in the throes of one of the deepest challenges of your life, you are on the hero's journey. We often talk about the journey of growth as something that sounds kind of ethereal and mysterious, but what's really incredible is there's actually quite a bit of structure to it. There is a predictable order in which the events of your journey will unfold. It will be immediately familiar to you as you listen to our guest describe the hero's journey. We have David Shechtman of Evolution on with us today, describing it for us and teaching us how to use it. But you will recognize the events and the arc of this story because it shows up in Superman, Batman, Cinderella, pretty much any story that you have ever read or seen, including your own life. So you're allowed to move faster through this journey. You're allowed to get unstuck. You're allowed to understand what might come next, and you're allowed to know where you are, even if things currently seem chaotic. So excited to have David here on the show. He's one of my favorite collaborators and always makes me laugh to death. So I'm very, very excited for him to be here on this kind of serious episode. So please jump in and let's learn about the hero's journey. Aloud. When you were born, you were whole, perfect. Then somewhere along the way, you learned that parts of you were not allowed here, and you began to chip away at yourself. What are the pieces of you that you've put into the basement? The parts of you that we cannot see anymore or that you cannot even remember? What are the ways that you, without even knowing it, are eroding your own aliveness, your creativity, and your well-being? And how can you reclaim the wholeness that is your birthright? I'm Dr. Caneel Joyce, and I'm here to join you in exploring these questions and many more you didn't even know you were allowed to ask. You are allowed to grow. You're allowed to dream. You are allowed to be exactly who you are and to become the next version of who you want to be. Start your journey of exploration with me right now on Aloud. Aloud. You are allowed to be whole. Thank you so much for coming back this week to join us on this episode about the hero's journey with my guest, David Shechtman, who's here live with me in the studio in LA today. Every time you show up for this show, you are investing in the most important thing you possibly can, which is your own growth, development, self-awareness, groundedness, and joy. The hero's journey is one of the most powerful models that we know of as coaches that explains the journey of growing as a human being. And I'm sure that once David explains to you what this looks like, you will begin to recognize it all over the place in your life and in the world. So let's dive into the conversation. Aloud. Today on the show, we have the incredible, delightful David Shechtman, who is one of my partners in Evolution, our coaching community, our coaching collective, our coaching firm. And I'm very excited to have you here, David. Thank you so much for coming out.
Yes, thank you, Caneel. It's great to be here.
Oh man, I've been looking forward to this for so long.
Me too.
Woo! I remember when I remember being outside of the Evolution house maybe like a year ago, and we started talking about like what could this podcast be, and we could debate some ideas and have different points of view. And here it's finally here. We manifested. High five. He's one of the only people I know who everywhere he goes, people keep saying, you need to have a podcast. He's seemingly effortlessly entertaining. So I'm really excited for him to be here. And what he's going to be speaking with us about today is the hero's journey. And we've had an opportunity to do a lot of work, some of which involved trials and struggle. And, you know, David, you've certainly seen me kind of break before and have helped pull me up. And it's been just such an honor to be able to work with somebody of your level of depth and character and intelligence. And I'm so excited that you're here today to teach me and the listeners about the hero's journey, because this is, I think for you, it's one of the most useful concepts in personal growth that there is. It's something I don't know a ton about, but I'm loosely familiar enough that you and I actually remember last year we were at our offsite, the Evolution Partner Gathering, and we were staying at an Airbnb in LA with a bunch of other partners. It was really, really fun. And we got into this fight about, it was a sparring match, like we like to have.
Mm-hmm.
As I was telling you how awesome the movie Superman is.
And you were like, yeah, well, you've got this hero who's
It's
doing
amazing.
this. And I was like, that's every movie that's ever been made. That's the hero's
journey.
journey.
You said that because it's every movie, it means that Superman is not a good movie. And I'm telling you.
Are we back in this
Superman
debate now?
is a really good movie.
Right. But
so, I had just seen it again. It was one of my favorites when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And I was explaining step by step about how this movie maps onto the hero's journey. Like, it's a perfect hero's journey. And some people agreed with me, but you were against.
Yes.
It is not a good movie.
I was not buying it.
And why were you not buying it?
Well, first of all, my recollection of that conversation was that you were lauding the movie for having a plot. So all movies have an arc.
Yes.
And what we're talking about today is the hero's journey, which is an arc for our lives.
Every story.
Right. Every story, mini stories, longer stories, lifetime stories, they follow an arc, right? And a sort of plot line that takes people through an experience.
Just because every movie follows the hero's journey, and so do our lives, does not mean that Superman is not a good movie. It's an incredible movie.
Okay, well, I don't want to come across as a Superman hater.
Yeah,
of
you
course,
better not.
But I'm not sure that disastrous special effects, uneven acting, and a terrible ending constitutes a great movie, even if it has a good hero's journey.
All right, agree, disagree. Well, when we plan our next film festival, we will not include that one, and that's a story for another day. The epic film festival. We're getting ahead of ourselves, though. Let's bring it back, and I want to dive into what is the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
So this hero's journey, it's in every story. And is there a story that a lot of our listeners would know about that really maps well onto the hero's journey?
So, well, the story that gets the most publicity about the hero's journey is Star Wars, because George Lucas read The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which was Campbell's book, and then based the entire
Who
world
is Campbell?
on that. Joseph Campbell?
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah. So Joseph Campbell was an academic and author.
Mm-hmm.
He taught for a long, long time, I think close to 40 years at Sarah Lawrence College. Mm-hmm. His main contribution was this anthropological study of cultures across time and geography.
Okay.
All the way from the very beginning of recorded civilization, cave paintings, all the way to the modern contemporary world that he lived in. Mm-hmm. So he was well known for that body of work and taught in a very dedicated fashion at Sarah Lawrence College. Later in his life, he did a great deal of speaking, presenting at Esalen and other sorts of organizations like that. And he is the author of many books, the first and really landmark book being The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
And this book is the source of our understanding of the hero's journey.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
As well as the spark of inspiration behind the movie Star Wars.
Exactly. And this is what really helped launch the hero's journey as a body of work into popular culture.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Bill Moyers, in particular, if you remember the journalist, he really took to Joseph Campbell. And many people saw a series of, I think it was interviews that he had done.
Okay. And
they co-authored a book called The Power of Myth, which is far more readable and accessible than A Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is like reading
density and
yeah, just unbelievably arcane sort of work. But that came from the work that Star Wars created, right? And I'm not sure that a lot of people today remember, but Star Wars was a critical failure. I mean, critics thought it was terrible. It was awful.
They were wrong.
It was poorly done and shot, but people were absolutely gripped by the characters, the story, the battle between good and evil. And that all comes from that very human experience that Campbell identified.
Oh, man. So can you tell me how Star Wars maps onto the hero's journey? And then we will get into why this matters, and what, the nitty-gritty of the hero's journey and how you can apply it to your life. But while we're talking about Star Wars, just give me the blow by blow at a high level.
So the hero is obviously Luke.
Luke Skywalker.
Luke Skywalker is the hero.
Yes.
And he's the individual who has these terrible things really befall him. If you think of the beginning of the movie, right? And if you just go back to, I can't remember the name of it, but I guess it's 4, right? Which was the initial movie that came out in 1977. Yeah. So he's living in this sort of basic kind of village existence. And he gets a calling to depart and to really become involved in this larger effort and struggle.
Okay, so this is a little foreshadowing for our audience. There's the call.
Right.
And then there is the departure.
Right.
And there is the struggle or the ordeal. Okay, then what happens?
And then he goes through a series of very challenging tests where success, victory, and even survival is not guaranteed.
Okay.
And he's forced to confront terrible threats and dangers. And through that experience, he improves, he learns, he channels talents and gifts, and fundamentally, as an individual, is changed by the experience. And upon the defeat of that test, of that ordeal, he returns home then.
The return home.
Yes.
Yes.
And shares his gifts.
The sharing of the gifts. So these are like
with the village.
Phases of the hero's journey.
Yes.
And that story it resonates so much if you look at any situation in your life, any big struggle. So, for me, some of the struggles or ordeals that I have faced is I have faced debt. I have faced pain. I'm recovered from a lot of back pain. I have faced big questions about my purpose and my career. Of course, I've faced heartbreak, and all of these struggles are exactly the things that gave me the gifts that I have now, that now my life's work is focused on giving those gifts back.
That's right.
And I know that so to go back to the change formula, which is the concept we introduced in episode 1 of this podcast, is I didn't have the sufficient discomfort in my life to be willing to overcome my resistance to change. I was holding on so tight to a certain way of being that until I faced this struggle, I was not willing to change. And then once I changed, I had the gifts. And this is the hero's journey.
That's right.
So.
And I also want to ground this in day-to-day experiences that people have. I would be willing to suggest that everybody listening to this podcast episode right now is involved in a hero's journey of sorts.
Somewhere in the process.
Somewhere in their experience. People are having children and beginning to leave the safety and the ease of either single life or married life without kids, and how predictable things are, and stepping into this unknown journey fraught with peril and uncertainty that will change them fundamentally forever as they are individuals.
I think this is often when we receive the call from a new client, is they are standing at that threshold.
Yes.
And they recognize that without this step forward, they will stay where they are. But if they do take the step, they're entering the unknown. And they want to.
Yes.
But it's uncertain and there's fear. And so they're looking for an ally.
Yes.
And that is also an element of the hero's journey, right? The ally.
The ally and the guide. And we are there often to help them. And business is a great example of this. Certainly anybody who's looked to start a business or do something dramatic that hasn't been done before in the innovation space is staring at a perilous road ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, an idea is the call.
Yes.
Or inspiration can be the call, or a desire to just get out of your current situation. This is not working for me. Yeah.
Right. I don't have to do this, but I feel a calling to do it.
Yeah.
And I know, even in ways that I can't fully articulate, that this is critical for me to do.
Oh my goodness. I am so in the hero's journey right now. Oh, okay. So when people ask, why are you starting this podcast? Are you doing it to get new clients? Are you, what are you trying to do here? And it was none of those things. It was, I am called. I had no explanation.
Yes.
But I knew it was, I know now what I must do. And then I started this podcast and I entered into this like vast space of unknown, because this is for those of you listening, like this was a significant ordeal on my part. This was a massive unraveling of a lot of my business to be able to get the funds and move them into developing content and get the time in my calendar of, instead of working with clients every day, all day, like removing those clients, which is also my source of income, and shifting that time and energy into this work that I was called to do. And basically I just was running a lot of fear for months, being like, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't even know exactly like how I'm going to get out of this current unsustainable situation. And now the allies are arriving. Right. And you are an example of that. You are one of my allies. And I know that you just launched your podcast, which, this episode will be aired in a couple months. But literally this week, I believe you launched your podcast series, which is called Journey to the End of the Race.
That's right.
And it's a pretty profound subject matter. It's about end of life. And we'll get more into that later and how it connects to the hero's journey. I'm so excited to get into this. From the minute I thought of having a podcast, I can't wait to do an episode with David. I cannot wait.
I'm happy it came together too.
Oh man, I'm so in it.
Let me give you an example, personal example for me. Mm-hmm. So I moved out to LA about 14 and a half years ago, I think. So I'd sold a house in Chicago where I was living before with my family. I was out here about a year into that experience. Feeling excited that I could go to the beach any day I wanted to, and terrified at my dwindling financial reserves and the sense that it wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be to make this change in my life. Also had a daughter who was about 18 months old. So I started.
That's a challenging
age in any circumstance, right? Let alone financial struggle and
they're
relocation.
Crossing a threshold at that point. They're realizing that there is separation between you and them, and they begin to resist.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're all dealing with thresholds at that point. So what did I decide to do? Go to grad school.
That's a good way to earn money.
So I decided to enter a full-time program. Now, thankfully, it was structured in such a way that I could still work, and travel kind of in chunks. So it was feasible from a calendar standpoint. But I did that not because it made sense in any sort of rational way, but because I knew that I needed to have that experience.
Yeah.
I knew, even though I couldn't explain why, that my future depended on it. I had to be in this experience. I had to grow myself, and I knew it was going to be frightening, uncertain, and stimulating. And even halfway through, I wasn't sure I was going to make it. I mean, now it all seems, perfectly normal that I would have completed and graduated and everything would have worked out.
Yeah.
I had time away from my family. My wife was losing her mind while I'm traveling the world in this grad school program, and she's dealing with a small child.
Oh my goodness.
And I had to work through those challenges.
Yeah.
And the gifts were enormous in terms of what I learned, who I met, and the future that it launched for me.
That's fascinating. I want to get more into that. So first, let's see. I would love to hear a little bit about what brought you into the work that you do as a coach.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I think I've got an interesting response. It was actually through the family business that I grew up in. So my dad came out of academia and social work and psychotherapy, never feeling good about the actual impact of what he was doing, the systems he was operating in, and always had a desire to do more on a different stage. At that time, right, this is the 70s, late 70s, early to mid 80s, he really struggled to find any sort of fit in the business community to support the type of work he wanted to do. So he created his own.
And what was the type of work he wanted to do?
Well, he wanted to do some very similar work to what we're doing now, which is really tying personal growth to professional development.
At that time, was that an edgy concept?
It was I'm not even sure I'd call it edgy as much as non-existent. It felt very probably fractured or disintegrated based on how we've seen the world evolve in the last 20 to 30 years. So people would do personal growth work and they would focus on professional development, but rarely ever connect the two.
Yes.
So he had to find people who were interested in taking that risk, exploring those topics, and having those interactions. And he started very small with this is all in the Chicago area. So he started with banks and the school district and police department and got some traction there, really just grinding it out in the trenches with people, and slowly built it from there, got some larger corporate clients, referred around the country, ended up writing books.
Whoa.
And
so that's a big upward trajectory there. So it started like with nothing.
That's right.
No demand.
That's right.
And created the demand somehow. And then wrote books.
Ended up writing books, becoming a speaker. Was kind of on the circuit for a while and presenting in front of some very prestigious groups of people. I got to benefit from that growing up, traveling a lot and seeing him work. And I enjoyed what I saw and experienced so much that I ultimately decided to join the firm 5 years after undergrad, after I finished.
Okay.
And it was funny at that time, I didn't really even know what I was getting into. I had a vague notion. I had just seen his work from a distance. But I was also aware that nothing else really clicked for me. I tried a lot of different work in sales, marketing, even some tech work, some web development, and I was good at all of it, but nothing ever really seemed to click where I felt I was doing my best work and people were appreciating the input that I was giving them. So I decided to join the family business. It felt risky at the time, but as soon as I was in front of clients, it was the experience I was hoping for. People liked the work and asked me back.
Wow. Great. Now you're here.
I'm here now.
And you have a degree from the really prestigious Pepperdine OD program, right? Organizational development.
That's right. That's right. So in the course of doing that work, our organization, my dad's company, had a lot of client activity in Southern California. I was coming out to LA, Orange County, San Diego on a regular basis. Really fell in love with it. And my wife was thinking, if I ever want to see you again, we should move out and not have to deal with me commuting all the time to the West Coast. So I came out and had an experience that I think a lot of people do when they come out to LA, which is, oh, this is harder than I expected. This is much more competitive and challenging than I ever anticipated. I need some more work. I need some more development and learning. So I landed on the Pepperdine program in organization development. So it's a master's degree in OD. And that was exactly what I was looking for.
All right. So let's dive in. I want to talk about the hero's journey. What is the hero's journey?
The hero's journey is, for me, a revealing, confounding, magical framework that I think in many ways is a skeleton key for human development. So whenever I've studied people development, I've been aware that there are two dimensions to the experience that people go through. One would be local or particular, and the other would be universal.
Okay. So the local or particular is like the content of my own life, my own job.
Yeah. Like
the details.
Yeah. Well, things that are unique to me.
Like
I live in LA. I come from a divorced family.
Yeah. My strengths are XYZ.
I have these challenges. I'm 5'10". I mean, all of those things that are just my circumstances.
Yeah. And what are the universal?
This is really the hero's journey.
That
is what represents the blueprint of a consistent experience that people go through on their journey. So, Caneel, you and I have our own local, unique, particular aspects to our own lives. And then we're both, in many ways, doing the same work on the same journey.
Right.
Those two exist at the same time.
Yes. So the colors are different, but the journey is the same.
Exactly. Exactly. So Joseph Campbell is the author and academic who first identified or noticed and called out this pattern that he saw.
What is that pattern? What does it look like?
Well, so he's a mythologist, and I think this is really important to call out.
Okay.
He would call himself a mythologist.
And this is myths in the anthropological sense.
Yes.
These stories that we tell again and again across cultures.
Exactly. And they create meaning for people, shared sense of meaning and purpose. So it's very easy to think of Greek mythology, Norse mythology. Those are, well documented and, and also referred to a great deal in those terms. But there are lots of other myths that we use on a regular basis that I don't think we really, label that way. Like think of the American dream.
Oh.
Is the American dream real? I don't know.
But it's a pattern that our human brains are attuned to seeing, and that we as humans are prone to experiencing.
And it has currency. So you talk about the American dream, people know what you mean.
What that is. It's those words invoke a whole entire story.
Yes.
Like the Cinderella story.
Yes.
Which, every culture has its own version of a Cinderella story.
Exactly.
Actually, the first class I took at UCLA as an undergrad was folklore and mythology. And it completely shaped the way that I think. The idea that we are all born in very separate places with brains that happen to have the same stories in them, and that we as cultures, whenever we come together in groups, are going to retell and experience these stories. I mean, that was there is programming in there that has content that blew me away. And this idea that there's a universal experience, it gives you something to work with when you're lost and things are feeling very, very chaotic. And I know that in the hero's journey, there are specific points where it feels very like there's a destruction element. Things are falling apart. Things are changing meaning. It's chaos. And so this idea that this is part of a process that is safe and that I'm not alone. Maybe I'm at this part of the process and you're at that part of the process, but that there's a path I can expect to fall into. I'd love to get into that, what that path looks like. Can you tell us about some of the stages in the hero's journey?
Absolutely. So this is where my frustration level with the content sometimes comes out.
I love when you get frustrated.
Yes, that's right. So let me tell a quick story about this, why it frustrates me so much, and then I'll directly answer the question and get into more detail and specifics.
Great.
So I'm sure you're familiar with that story of Apple, the early days when Jobs and Wozniak went to Xerox PARC. And they entered this startup lab that was the West Coast affiliate of Xerox, which was headquartered in the Northeast.
And back then, Xerox PARC was like the place to develop technology. I mean, it created a lot of what Silicon Valley is today.
Well, that's exactly right. But when the co-founders of Apple walked in, they discovered the mouse, the graphical user interface, and all of these different tools that ended up totally revolutionizing personal computing.
Humanizing computers, giving us a way to speak to them.
But if you know the rest of that story, they were just sitting in this lab and nobody in the headquarters for Xerox was paying any attention to it. So what did Apple do? They paid a paltry fee to license this, took the technology and changed the world. All right. So you can look at that a couple of ways, like, wow, look at the Steves from Apple.
Yeah.
The other way to look at it is, what in the world were they doing or not doing with all of these magical learnings and inventions?
Little side note on this, because it connects to something I was reading just this morning, and I tend to trust synchronicity. So in my little meditation shed, I have a copy of Napoleon Hill's what is it? The Power of Positive Thinking, something to that effect. And I just flip open to random chapters sometimes and I'll read a couple pages. What I was reading about today is that just as our human eyes can be nearsighted or farsighted, so can our mindset.
Yeah.
And if we're nearsighted in our mindset, we're very focused on the here and now and what do I need to do with what's around me, but we lack long-term vision. And if we are farsighted, then we can only see the long-term vision, but we can't execute. It's all this like ideal, dreamy future state. But what's here and now we're not dealing with, including we are not recognizing opportunities that are right under our nose. So Napoleon Hill says the challenge is how can we not have either nearsightedness or farsightedness, but have like this range of vision? I think we're each prone to our own end of that extreme. But this sounds like Xerox PARC was in the farsighted, perhaps, and just not noticing like this really is something.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. So my experience with the hero's journey is lots of people know a great deal about this material, mm-hmm. and they're arguing about arcane, pointless details that have nothing to do with most people's lived experience. So they have the key, a skeleton key potentially to fundamentally transforming human experience. And they're arguing about whether Osiris was wearing a brown robe or a blue robe.
Wait, who's doing the arguing in this story?
So my experience is going to study of myth symposiums, to various lectures and conferences about Joseph Campbell and mm-hmm. his material. Mm-hmm. And I'm experiencing academics primarily debating these points that fundamentally don't change or alter the course of anyone's life. Mm-hmm. Really, and ultimately trying to claim some sort of expertise mm-hmm. on the model mm-hmm. when it's not theirs to claim. Mm-hmm. And who cares anyway if they're right? What matters is if I can derive practical use from the concepts. Mm-hmm. So it enrages me mm-hmm. at times that something so powerful and something so great is not getting the utility that it could.
So the hero's journey is the mouse.
Yes.
And society is Xerox PARC.
Yes.
Or academia is Xerox PARC. Yes.
So for me, just I'll tell this one quick story and then I'll get more into the framework. I came to the hero's journey to give meaning and purpose to a lot of suffering in my life that I was going through, feeling like I was struggling, not getting ahead, not having the experiences I wanted to. But I felt like I was doing the right things. I was taking risks. I was putting myself out there. I was trying very diligently and earnestly to improve myself, and I was still in a strugglesome state. So I needed to have some sort of framework to explain and define what I was doing and going through.
Yeah.
So it really didn't matter if Osiris was wearing a brown robe or a blue robe in, millennia past. What matters is if I could give context, meaning, and purpose to my life experience.
Yeah. So there's a practical utility to this framework
that rarely gets embraced.
Why is it important to have a meaning and purpose?
Well, I mean, I didn't grow up in a very religious background by many people's standards. I mean, I would say there was spirituality that was a part of my life, but not a lot of, church or synagogue service or, not a lot of ritual that I was experiencing. And so one, judgment I make of religion is that, in addition to all the other things that people tend to think about it, it creates some narrative structure that helps people make meaning of their life and define the experiences that they have. And so I was in a position of not really having much of that in my life, not really wanting to go join an organization I maybe didn't feel called to or feel good about participating in. So I guess in some ways I was looking for a secular version of what that would be.
Wow, that's so fascinating. So this framework for you has been your touchstone.
Yeah. And
I really relate to those times where for years you are trying everything you can think of to pull yourself out of a hole of some kind, pull yourself out of debt or pain or broken heart or illness, just hard knocks, or maybe all of those at the same time. And when we have a touchstone, it's like a rope we can pull ourselves out with. And so the hero's journey can be that. And has been that for you.
And also a sanity check.
Right.
I'm sure you're like me and many other people feel alone, broken, miserable in times of struggle and suffering. And some of these struggles and some of the suffering comes from great things.
Yeah.
I think of being a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Love my daughter more than anything else on the planet. And
hardest thing in the world.
Incredible misery is accompanied that experience along the way. A roller coaster of intense experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Being a business owner, launching new things, there's incredible challenge and struggle that comes with that.
Right.
So to be able to contextualize that and also feel ennobled by it, this is worthy, this is meaningful, this is for the good of me and the world.
I'm in this phase of my hero's journey, but I am still a hero.
Yes.
Yeah.
Means a lot.
It does.
To me.
It does mean a lot. So let's get into what it looks like.
So I want to explain this in a couple of ways. I want to start with the most simplified version you could ever think of related to this. And then we can add more detail as we go.
Great.
But I want to start simple because, again, I want people to derive benefit and value today after they listen to this podcast episode.
Actually, in the show notes, we will link to a diagram of this model so that people can, if you want to, even right now, you can just click the link, go to the show notes, and grab the the downloadables there, so that they can look at it while you talk through it.
That's
if you want to, and you can get that at caneel.com/podcast.
That's great.
But we will talk through it in a way that you don't need any notes if you don't want them.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. So let me get started here. First off, there are 3 main sections of this journey, or stages. And people, even within these high level 3, will use different terms. So I'll try to give a couple of examples of what they would be. The first is departure. Sometimes people call it separation. The idea is that the individual, the hero, is leaving a familiar space, a known state, a known location to embark on some sort of adventure.
So an example of this might be, I'm leaving home for the first time. I'm leaving my virginity behind. I'm leaving, my maidenhood, and now I'm becoming a mother. Yeah. So there are many, even just in life stages there are, but then also we leave jobs, we leave relationships, we leave parts of ourselves behind that are not serving us. Yeah. So lots of this departure or separation in our life.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The next stage then is sometimes referred to as ordeal or initiation. And this is the stage where the hero is crossing the threshold, entering into this unknown, unfamiliar, uncertain space or location.
Yes.
And where a series of challenges, struggles, characters, people come into the experience.
So this is the first day of moving into the dorms and all of the chaos of that, or it's the transition stage of labor. Yeah. So this is familiar. Okay. So you're disoriented a little bit in this stage.
Disoriented. And there's also typically an immense amount of struggle. So I can share some more deeper details later, but oftentimes people think of this in medieval terms. So there's like a dragon to go fight, right? There's some sort of big test that faces the hero.
So I love this. For our listeners, this, David, one of the things that we do on this podcast is we create a live personal coaching session for our listeners. And so I'd invite you as a listener to think about, in your life, where have you been in the stage of separation? And then what was it like when you went into initiation? And what did that feel like? Who was there? What are the memories implanted in your brain? What was it like in your body, emotionally? It's because it's important, right? To connect to your point about these tools need to be practical. It's important for us to give ourselves the space to start looking at how our life has order and meaning.
Typically then in this experience, the hero acquires a gift. So something comes from this ordeal or a series of tests that take place. And it's, usually a change, an internal change that occurs. So if I move away, I gain the, life skills of being independent. If I start a business, I begin to gain then the talents and the, financial resources that come from succeeding in that way. The final stage then is a return. This is coming back, coming home to where you started and sharing that gift or the change with the world. It's a restorative type of experience.
Oh, that's beautiful. What's an example of that from your life?
One initial one that comes to mind is studying abroad. So my junior year of undergrad, I decided to study in Central and Eastern Europe. And this is in the early 90s, early to mid 90s. So it's a time of incredible transition in that part of the world.
Berlin Wall came down in 89.
89, right. And so all these political, social, economic systems are in, rapid change. And now you can go online and watch a webcam in Budapest or something. But at that time, it seemed really, unknown and just sort of had access to these places, through watching the Olympics or something like that, or the occasional documentary.
It makes it sound so long ago, like there were such dinosaurs.
Makes me feel very old. That's right. So, talk about a departure from the familiar, right? Yeah. I was living in Chicago, suburban Chicago in the Midwest. And next thing you know, I'm in Budapest and then Prague living. So, especially again at that time, big change. It was not a globalized world. Yeah. So I was going into these places where I didn't know the language. I didn't understand the customs. Very few people spoke English. It was very disorienting. So, now looking back, it seems like, well, of course, all that happened and I figured it out as I went. But at the time, it felt like I was, traveling to a different dimension or planet or something. So I'm crossing the threshold, going into that very foreign environment.
So the separation was you left Chicago. The initiation was the chaos of first arriving and how disorienting that was.
That's right.
Then what happened?
Well, and then I went through all sorts of challenges trying to, do well academically, to meet friends, to establish an identity, to be happy, and to really, in some ways, form my own independent sense of self at that stage. To that point, I had really been defined by my environment, my parents and my affiliations at college and the people I knew. And I was going into this place where all of that was stripped away. I was a visitor in a foreign land, and there were no expectations of me to be anything or do anything, which sounds incredibly liberating and exciting, and also terrifying in its ambiguity.
Yes.
So I went through the idea or through the experience of really forming a personality. And I think at that point is when I really connected to the idea of having a worldview, one that's not parochial and just narrowly focused on my own personal experiences or narrow view of the world. And I really began to define myself as an expert of other cultures, as being an individual who can connect and mix with different people, and who is I think an influencer. I think that's where I really developed the ability to influence other people through thoughts and relational interaction. And again, it all sounds from a distance like pretty obvious, and I was over there, but there were people who were struggling to leave their dorm rooms. There were people who were struggling to eat at a restaurant that, didn't have the golden arches outside of it.
Right.
And so it was really an immersive experience, and it fundamentally changed me and gave me a series of gifts.
And how are you giving those back to the world now?
Well, so then I returned, very literally returned back to the States. I didn't come home at all during that time. So my parents came to visit me, and I traveled a bit with family. So I was gone for about 10 months.
Wow.
And came back to the States, noticed all the changes that had happened in my home country at being gone, and then was able to come back and make some very specific decisions about who I wanted to be, the type of work I wanted to do, and the sorts of friendships I wanted to invest in. And I really don't think that I would have been able to launch down this career path had I not gone through that experience. Because Prior to that, I may have had an interest in being a part of my dad's organization and working in the same field, but I don't think I had the independent sense of identity and the ability to influence people through communication and relational interaction prior to that experience. So I was able to take something that had fundamentally changed me and share that with others as a gift.
Oh, wow. That's, I'm connecting this framework now to so many parts of my life. And many of you listening have heard me tell the story about my back and how I recovered from back pain and the meaning of that ordeal in my life. And, I guess for me, the separation there was I was leaving my dreams behind. No, I was leaving
Oh, that sounds harsh.
It does. I was leaving like my way of thinking behind. And the result of all of that, the suffering involved, I guess this would be the ordeal, was the back pain and how crippling that was and how it just totally stopped my life. In the process of healing, I discovered an internal sense of integrity. So I think it was that embodiment intelligence that I gained. And the return for me, just to skip parts of the story, like the return for me was recognizing how all the gifts I came for to academia, like they were true gifts, but it was the ordeal that gave me that embodiment, and I use that every day now. And so I'm returning. I mean, this show, allowed. Like I didn't allow myself in that PhD program to say no, to make the changes until I had the back struggle. And now I know how to do that. And that's the message I'm trying to get through here in every show, is just how much we are allowed.
Yeah.
We're so allowed. We're allowed to do so much more than we think we are.
Can I ask you some questions about that?
Yeah.
So I'll set the question up. In my experience that I shared earlier about studying abroad, I had to face a dragon as a part of the ordeals I went through. And for me, that was very much about voice. Do I have any voice of my own, or am I simply a parrot of somebody else?
Yeah.
So that wasn't necessarily a person, or a department or anything I was fighting, but I was definitely fighting an internal belief.
Yeah.
Right. Which is, just as daunting, if not more, than an external creature.
Right.
What was that for you in the story you shared?
I was wrestling with boundaries. Boundaries that I was failing to set with myself in my life, like, really working way too hard on way too many things. I was a yes girl. I probably had like 7 projects going simultaneously, which are when you're doing like hardcore research, that is way too many. And I worked with several different departments across campus. I published articles in like engineering journals, design journals, organizational development, psychology. So I was really sprawled. And the reason behind all my back pain was hypermobility, which basically means overly flexible. And so at the same time as this, I was really struggling with I had so many ideas. It was really hard for me to narrow the focus enough to find one thing to become what I was going to study for the next 4 years and what my dissertation was going to be about, which is going to be the launch pad for the rest of your research program, really, for the next 10 years, probably. So that felt so scary to me. Yeah. Commit, know me. So like committing to one thing felt very, very scary. And so I ended up realizing that if I was going to be able to tolerate the constraint, I actually needed to fall in love with it. Like I needed to find a way to love limits and boundaries. So my dissertation research was about creativity in constraint. And like, what is the role of constraint on creativity? And what I found is that it's essential. It's total, and which was a thing that in my mind, I was so like kind of liberal in a way in my thinking that I just thought any idea is a great idea.
Yeah.
Let's go do all of them. And I didn't have that sense of alignment and integrity of like, there's a way to constrain that is artful. Constraints themselves can be the art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to jump in and make a point. So I love this story. And part of the reason I think the hero's journey is something that more and more people need to understand and utilize is that I think in your example, you could have read a book about constraints and you could have intellectually grasped the concept and shared it very fluently with groups of people. And I'm not sure that would have delivered much difference in your life. And I don't think we'd be sitting here on this podcast right now. I believe you had to have that experience and wrestle with those challenges and ordeals and the road of trials and all the other things internally so that you could embody the change.
Completely. There's no way I was going to give up on being a sprawler.
Yes.
There was absolutely no way.
Yes.
I mean, I needed to be forced into, couldn't even walk.
That's right.
And then it was like, okay,
that's right.
Let's get out of here. The way out is finishing.
That's right.
With a PH.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, so the world we live in, and you and I both know this from the work we do, is we tend to see environments where work is just painful and punishing and nothing but ordeal. And then we tend to also see environments where it's nothing but initiate or nothing but like celebration and return and happiness and positivity. And I think people are viewing this way too much as polarities. I work with some clients where the day-to-day is a miserable nightmare of suffering. And that's considered hard work or good work. And then I'm also in environments where people are celebrating the excitement of being together all the time. And I don't think either one really delivers embodied change. It's just endless cycles of one stage.
Yes.
So I think what's important is that it's all relevant. You know, the courage to leave, the bravery and perseverance to work through challenge, and the excitement of coming home and sharing the glory and gifts and contributions of the world. But it's got to be the whole cycle. Otherwise, people are just sharing interesting intellectual concepts that don't do much.
Yeah. And so we have a tendency to grip on or get stuck sometimes in these phases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And not process through the cycle.
So it helps to have this roadmap
to
know what does it look like next?
Yes.
Yes. So much. So much.
Yes.
And I love the idea too of really valuing each of these stages in the process and seeing them as productive.
Yes.
Because this tells us how struggle is productive.
That's right.
It tells us how separation is productive and that we will get to go home.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So if you're okay with it, I'd like to put a little more meat on the bones, so to speak, with this. So and I don't want to give the full treatment because I'm not sure the full treatment is worth that a level of detail and explanation, and people can go download this and find it online, etc. But there are other people and other aspects of the experience that come into it. So first off, the hero tends to hear a call to action, right? So sometimes people think of like, you know, the villager in medieval wherever, and this, you know, sort of, we need you to go save the community, go find this, go, you know, get the gem or whatever it would be. There's some call that this individual hears.
Okay, so when the bear was living in your backyard,
I figured this would make it into it was the crawl space of my house.
What was the call what was the call of the bear? How did you find out about the bear? Let's map, because I want to show how this happens in a micro, like in small, you know, short time frame stories, and it also happens at a very macro level across the course of our life. Right. So, and I love the bear story. So
I'll go with you.
All right, what's the call?
Well, I think the call was literally from our neighbor saying there's a bear crawling into your crawl space of your house, and you might want to do something about that.
You live in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
There are bears wandering around in Los Angeles in your house.
Yeah. In the structure of my house, there was a bear. Yeah, it was in the crawl space.
Did you believe them?
I had no reason to disbelieve the neighbor, and I think I had the reaction most people do, which was a mini panic attack. Called the authorities and very quickly realized that I was on my own.
Oh yes, the separation.
Yeah. So I was like separated from the society that was sworn to protect me, apparently. But yeah, then not too many times in life I felt like the authorities just left me on my own to figure out a dangerous situation.
They didn't want to deal with the bear.
Well, they kept like referring me to the animal control, then the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I was like, well, he'll leave eventually. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting approach. So I realized there's a bear in my crawl space. And, at that point, that was late in the night. So I eventually just went to sleep, figured out that nothing was going to happen under the cover of darkness. The next day, realized that, he was still there.
Yes. I remember seeing on Slack, you said, bear is still here. And that was where I first entered the story. And I'm like, what is going on here?
That's right.
I love that you updated us through the process.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I had to create some like journalistic sort of flow to it. So I then realized he was still there. It was hot. So, he was getting out of the sun. I mean, it made sense to me. Then I got some pro tips from YouTube, apparently, on how I could blast him with music, spray ammonia into the area that he was in, some other sort of bad ideas that didn't work. Pleaded again for the authorities to come.
And this is what stage are we in now of the hero's journey?
Yeah, we're in the initiation here. We're in the ordeal. Yeah. We're going through this. Actually thought that I developed a primitive communication system with the bear where I would like stomp on the ground. And if I stomped once, he would grunt once. If I stomped twice, he would grunt twice.
You guys are becoming friends.
Yeah. So it was maybe using that skill of intimacy and influence with a 400-pound bear. And what I ultimately, I think, gained from this experience and this knowledge was that I couldn't control it. And I actually developed some empathy and understanding for the bear once I got out of my panic and frustration at the situation that was in front of me. I, initially started to think, well, this is just sweltering outside. I mean, I wish he was in my pool. Actually, that would have been fine with me too. But he's
a crazy heat wave.
But he's in shade, so I understand that. Started to think more about, just the situation that he's this drought and this heat and all these challenges and his environment and people living there and, everything else that happens in these wildlife interface zones and, the city and the country. And then recognize that I didn't have the ability to change this, and at least not directly, and could either drive myself crazy or I could understand a bit about how he was going to operate and then make some decisions to align with whatever that pattern and cycle was.
So you recognize that you were in the ordeal.
Yeah.
And you chose to move out of it.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Yeah. And I chose to listen to some instinct and natural sense of things too. Whereas so much of my life is about like overcoming all that, like I'm tired, I just need to power through it, or I don't want to do this.
Denying
I just need to force
your animal
myself.
body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My animal sense. And, my therapist happened to believe that this was all about me getting in touch with my instinctual nature.
Yes.
Which, is for so much of my life just been dormant and hibernated. And then on top of that, I'm in a men's group, and in the men's group,
what's a men's group? Just real quick for our listeners.
Yeah. So the men's movement started kind of in the late 70s and early 80s and was a way of really creating a structure for masculinity and for men to be a part of. That, maybe historically it existed in a lot of societies and it sort of been like sanitized out in a lot of the modern world with our modernity and, and just changes and, rise in feminism and a lot of things.
Trying to not be animals.
Right. But there's still a need that men have to be in community with each other and to process, in healthy ways what, mature masculinity can look like.
So you're in the men's group.
Yeah.
Back to the bear.
So, we all have animal names.
In the men's group?
In the men's group. That's a part of the men's group.
Oh, wow.
So guess what my animal name is?
No.
Powerful Bear.
You are kidding me.
Not at all.
Wow.
Not at all.
So the bear came to visit you.
Yes.
You were friends.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And, when thinking of power and sort of base nature and instinct, right? The chakra idea is that it's at the base, right? Sort of the base of the spine, the bottom of the torso. So I have a bear in my crawl space, right? Right below where I am.
Unbelievable.
Sort of like
in
driving
the base of your cave.
Yeah, my cave.
Yes.
Channeling energy up and through into me.
Oh, this is awesome.
So it was really a magical experience in many ways. And what I was then able to do when getting in touch more with myself and with this creature and with the process of removal, I guess, or allowance, I guess, for departure for him.
He eventually left.
And then we boarded it up so he couldn't get back in.
Okay.
But then I was able to tell some funny stories, which, was not nothing, right? But also to recognize where in my life my instincts were not alive. Where in the world was I dormant?
Yes. And dude, David, like the last year of your life, you have been a rocket ship. Like you are on fire right now. I feel like it's been success after success after success, but contribution. I'd like to talk about your podcast in a moment, because I think this is like one of the many gifts that you're bringing back after this ordeal. Which who knows how important that ordeal was? Does it feel like it was an important ordeal in your life?
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, I don't think I had the perspective of it to see how it would all play out. But it felt pretty significant. This is also part of my embracing of this, is to see that the challenges and obstacles along the way are gifts too.
Absolutely. So this was almost completely what our Thanksgiving episode was about on this podcast, is the gift in the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So all of that is going to come.
So I recommend that. That was episode number 3. I recommend going back to that. There's also a really funny blooper reel, which was our own ordeal. We had our own ordeal happen during the filming of that podcast. So you can watch all that, listeners. You can watch the video as it unfolds. Go ahead.
That's right. So there's going to be a call to action, right? That the hero is going to somehow receive. There's typically a refusal then of that call. So it's very normal. It's typically a part of the process that the hero is going to go, yeah, sounds like a good idea. I don't think I'm going to do that. And then for there to be a reconsideration, potentially even influence from other people who end up swaying that opinion, or the hero comes around and ultimately decides to answer that. And then there, again, I said I'm not going to talk about every last thing, but then there's the move to a threshold, right? So there's a departure and a threat crossing the threshold experience, which goes from known to unknown. So, at the airport, flying to Europe, right?
Yeah.
For me, sitting
that
there,
feeling
right?
of takeoff. Like,
I
remember that when I first moved to Europe. Yeah.
Like,
whoa.
I mean, that is a heavy experience. Even if nothing dramatic happens, it's just you're sitting there and like, my life is never going to be the same after today. It will be fundamentally changed. It's not probably a handful of experiences in life that feel that way for precious people, right? At that level.
Yeah.
Then in the unknown space, right, into this initiatory ordeal type of place, people come into your life, allies, supernatural aids, sometimes they're called. People you may have known this person. Suddenly this person gives you something that helps you on your journey. Didn't see it coming.
This is part of the actual model.
Exactly.
Allies arrive.
Exactly.
Wow.
And often in places you would never expect to see them.
So if I know that, I can begin looking for them.
Yes. And also people who are in your way, challenges, obstacles, not even dragons who represent some supreme ordeal, but just people who are in the way. They're not there necessarily to harm you. They're there to teach you something as you go. And then you get gifts. Sometimes they're called boons, right? Just another word for gift. And then back into the known experience, there's a return threshold. Sometimes there's actually a refusal to return, being at that space of loving this sort of like dynamic the world, unknown world, the thrill of that, but then a re-entry into that, and then the sharing and all sorts of integrative types of experience of energies and ideas and thoughts. This is going to sound extremely corny, but again, I want this model to be useful. Think of a James Bond movie.
Okay. I can't.
Right. All right. But
different movies.
Just think of a typical James Bond movie,
okay.
Right. So
I can imagine.
So here's James Bond in some sort of familiar environment. He's playing poker. He's drinking. He's cavorting. He's flirting. He's doing something that he knows, and he gets a call.
Yes.
Right. And he doesn't want to respond to the call because
it's M or whatever.
Yeah, right? M or Q or I think M. Yeah. And so he's partying. He doesn't want to go to headquarters. Finally, he realizes he has to go to headquarters. Then he gets this assignment and he has to go save the world somehow.
Separation.
Right. Take on some evil. So he departs and then he's in wherever he is, right? Some exotic location and locale with, people. And this was maybe a little different in the 60s and 70s because the world didn't know as much about other reaches. But still, he's in South America. He's in New Orleans. He's in Russia.
He crosses the threshold out of where he was into this new place. And
suddenly people show up. Right?
Allies.
Challengers. Right?
Gifts.
Well, that's coming, right?
Coming soon,
but all these, he's got like someone from the CIA who's helping him here, and he's got, some, kind of love interest who's
totally hot woman who's just like a badass.
Right.
One thing only.
Right. And you can't tell, is she on his side or the other side? Right. And there's some ambiguity about that. These are all those sorts of kind of shape-shifting characters that exist. And then he's got some big ordeal, right? Some specter or villain that he has to take on. And he's not guaranteed to win, right? And you don't know until the very end that he's going to. And sometimes at the very end, this, person comes in and helps save him in a way that he could never have done on his own. And then he gets some gift, right? He gets like the code, or he disarms the bomb, or he learns some secret or whatever it is. And he returns back to England and to headquarters and restores the world.
Yes.
Like, it's sort of cheesy and comical and melodramatic, but that is essentially the framework.
Superman follows this. Frozen. Many movies map right onto that. Probably everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Because
that makes it very real.
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Useful. I'd like to get a little bit more into the denial of the call.
Right.
In my experience, calls have an expiration date. I've heard before, there's a half-life of inspiration. And when you're that first spark of inspiration, it's strongest, and then it gradually just goes down and down and down, but it never goes away. And that's how half-lives work. In my experience, when I deny the call, if I don't recover quickly enough, I'm left with this energetic gunk, like I'm toxic, a lifetime of accumulated denials of self. What have you seen happen when we deny the call? And what are some examples of that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind, though, hearing you say this, is that denial is necessarily bad.
No.
So
I don't think it is. I think it's that we can stay stuck in that phase. Sometimes it looks like a choice, right?
Yes.
Okay, I have an idea. I have some inspiration. I have a call, an opportunity.
Yeah.
And we can make a choice at that moment or shortly thereafter, and we can say yes or no. Do I have a whole body? Yes.
Yeah.
If not, no, ideally. But when we're ambivalent or avoiding whatever that choice is confronting us with, or we desperately do want to cross that threshold, but we're not really willing.
Yeah.
And we stay stuck in the I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I feel like, a lot of us live in that zone a lot of the time.
Right.
That's what I mean by the denial. Yeah.
So, a few things come to mind. First off, I think having ambivalence early on is healthy, because if I don't really have a choice, I don't really ever commit.
Right.
If I have to do something.
We have to have agency in making that choice.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's very healthy and normal to have ambivalence or concern, or even to just hold back. But what I think you're describing more fully that often gets in people's way is this idea of partial commitment to calling.
Yes. Totally.
And this is one of those very subjective and challenging things to talk through, because there are just no markers that are definitive in terms of have to or won't.
Yeah.
But many people end up living lives that feel less than as a result of ignoring a calling that comes.
Yeah.
Whether the calling comes from someone they know, someone they don't know, a source they never would have imagined.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us get that voice in our head that says it's important to do this,
Mm-hmm.
that you may not succeed.
Mm-hmm.
You may not succeed in the way you think you will.
Yeah.
You may face perilous challenges along the way,
Mm-hmm.
but it's worth it because it's who you are and what you're meant to do.
Right. And so the calling might be the calling to leave a toxic relationship, the calling to quit your job and strike out on your own as an entrepreneur, the calling to disappoint your parents, to leave your hometown. There are so many that linger with us, to live your truth, And it's a truth that is so subjective.
Yes.
That's the nature of calling. It's kind of a through me experience.
Yes.
It's not rational. If we don't have a connection to our bodies and our emotions, if we're in like avoidance or denial mode all the time,
yeah,
we are finding ways to not hear the calling.
That's right. And you and I live in the personal growth world quite a bit. We tend to live in the personal growth world for professional development, but it's still the personal growth world. And I pay attention to a lot of authors who are very frustrated by the contemporary view of psychology and personal growth, where it feels like it is pathologizing individuality.
Yes.
That there's some sort of normative behavior that we all have to adopt in our life in order to be healthy.
Right.
Well, I don't want to be healthy and sanitized of any distinctiveness in my life.
Yes.
So if I'm meant to do something on this earth, it's not necessarily going to be a clean experience. And it's not necessarily going to be the same way that someone who wrote the DSM manual tells me it needs to be.
Yeah.
This is an adventure.
This is an adventure.
I want to choose that adventure and make it mine.
Yeah, man. So if we think about the hero's journey, of course, it happens in small situational ways. It also happens over the course of our whole lives. And I'm wondering about if you think about like from birth to death, there are parts of that journey that I feel like societally, culturally, we understand that there's an ordeal, like midlife.
Yeah.
There's an ordeal, right? It's who am I?
Yeah.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Time is happening.
Yeah.
I am mortal. And then we go through our crisis or our, what are we calling it now? The midlife emergence. And we find the gift. We don't want to be middle-aged, but we do cross that threshold.
Yeah.
And then we wrestle with ourselves, the dragons in ourselves. And then we discover that there is a freedom in us claiming our power, usually, and in us claiming our mortality.
Yeah.
That actually that's a gift. And then we go through whatever happens in those last however many years, 50 years. And then there's the end. And I guess for the hero's journey, that would be the return home. And something that you and I have chatted about before is how it's so fascinating that death is one of the only universal experiences. And it's the one we know the least about. And I know that this is something that's really up for you this week, even lots of loss. And coincidentally happens to be a week when your podcast came out, which is a 6-part series. And it's a beautiful idea. And I'd love you to share what that's about and how it connects to this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So as you mentioned earlier, everywhere I go, at least in the circles that you and I traffic in, people tell me that I need to have a podcast. So it's been on my mind for a number of years. I know that I have an interest in sharing, and I know I have a good voice for this medium. I really have been struggling, though, with how exactly to do that. Sadly, a number of months ago, a former client and I got back in contact, and I learned that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer at age 39 with a family of 4 children. So I was, horrified to hear the news and wanted to be supportive of him, initially just through talking and listening. But as we got through the conversation a bit more, he mentioned to me that, our connection had always been strong, and he had an interest in maybe doing something given his situation. And it was just in that call, in the moment.
The call.
Yeah, right. The call that my mind sorted to podcast. I just said, this might be the opening, the opportunity to get involved in that sort of work, given the unique and heavy experience that he was going through, and given my interest in putting myself out there and being of service in this way. So as I talked to him about interviewing him about his life and experience going through this, he had a very positive reaction to it. And saw that as something that he'd like to do.
It sounds massively courageous. I mean, I can't imagine anything more intimate than facing end of life.
I know. So I started to think more about this, and I thought in my own mind that simply a conversation about what it's like to be 39, hear this news, deal with his family, make short-term plans for the remainder of his life, that would be a pretty compelling insight that not a lot of people are able to hear. But I also thought, I'm not sure that that's the extent that I want, to bring into this project. I think there's something more universal about this too. Back to that local and universal kind of idea. And when I thought about the universality of death and mortality, as you explained, there's an unbelievable paradox to it. So nobody definitively knows what happens at the time of death. I mean, people have theories, and maybe the Tibetans have gotten closer than anyone else to, mapping this out or writing about it, but no one ultimately knows. There's no proof. And if you stop and you think about that, that is crazy. Right? I mean, in the entire history of humanity, the only certain thing to happen is unbelievably mysterious.
Yes.
But although it's incredibly mysterious, when people are faced with death, it's tremendously clarifying. There's a lot of study that's been done on near-death experiences, and a lot of, even if it's just anecdotal awareness that people have, that when someone they care about dies or suffers a very difficult tragedy, they suddenly see priorities in their life. They suddenly know what they want to do. I even remember after 9/11, 2001, there was this tremendous rush of people to do something in the world, to be significant,
to get out of whatever rat race they were in, start their life.
Right. To really lean into a passionate project of some sort, because they were confronted by all, terrible horror and devastation. So mystery leads to certainty. So I wanted
the mystery of death leads to certainty about life.
Yes.
Holy moly.
So I wanted to explore that in the podcast series. So I'm interviewing Todd Anderson about his story up until the news, and then his story through that news, and in his recent times of dealing with it, what it's been like to go through it, and more importantly, how it's changed him as a man.
Wow. What a lot of trust he has in you. Ooh, where can we hear the podcast?
JourneyToTheEndOfTheRace.com.
JourneyToTheEndOfTheRace.com. We will link to this in the show notes. And I'm really excited to listen to this. And also, I know that the way that you hold this topic is, it feels like I will be able to listen to something about death without feeling completely bogged down. Because you're illuminating for me even right now, just how fascinating it is, and just the curiosity of it. And I think with this understanding of the hero's journey, that there are stages that we pass through, and that each has value. And we come back and we return our gifts. And actually, this is a gift that he's giving back.
Tremendous gift.
Give to the world. Give to the world to share this.
He's already done some presentations that, had nothing to do with me, but he spoke at his former company. He was like an annual meeting main stage speaker. And he shared with me that standing up and talking for 20 or 25 minutes about his story has led to dozens and dozens of people reaching out to him, sharing their experience, revealing secrets they had kept from anyone their entire lives. Just being open about this topic has led to radical transformation in many, many lives.
Many lives. It's so powerful to share. I'm really glad that you're sharing your gifts with the world. And, boom, like we did it. We're doing it.
Absolutely.
It's happening right now. We're finally doing it. It's really exciting. So, David, thank you so much for being here today. This was amazing and really useful for me. My brain is swirling with the meaning that I can make of this and the idea that I can recognize that I'm in a phase that's where there's suffering, and I can choose to move out faster, and I can choose to look for allies, and I can look for gifts, and I can look for meaning, and I can look for what is this challenger, like what's the skill they're giving me? What am I learning? It feels like incredibly productive work. So thank you so much for sharing this work.
Yeah, you're welcome, Caneel. It's been great to be here.
So for our listeners, David is offering a worksheet that will help you to identify where you are in your own hero's journey and to map your life or some situation onto the hero's journey and discover the many benefits of the model, but also find a path out for yourself that is meaningful and rich and productive. So thank you for offering that. We're going to put that in the show notes, which you can find at caneel.com/podcast. And I believe this is episode 10. So caneel.com/podcast-10 will specifically get you there. Next week, it's interesting. Our guest next week actually connects a lot to what we were talking about in the middle of this show about how, with your bear story, how we often deny that, our animal nature, and that we're turning back to, oh yes, I'm going to protect my family, and I don't have control, and I'm mortal, and just mortality in general. A lot of this connects to some work that is done by a woman named Beth Killow, and she runs an organization called Circle Up. I had the benefit of working with her all day yesterday with my year-long leadership development group, which is launching again soon. And applications are open right now. But at the end of that program, she came down and she guided everybody through some equine leadership training. So basically learning about their leadership and how they can grow with horses. She's huge on really understanding what it means that we are animals and how when we forget that we're animals, we can't lead. So some of the practices she's going to offer fall within a framework she has called natural leadership. And it's interesting. Of course, we're animals everywhere we go. So probably it would connect to every episode, but I'm glad that we got to talk about it today. So you guys can check that out next week. It'll be in episode 11. All right. Thank you so much for being here and making the time and space for yourself to learn and to grow. We will see you back here next week. And I wish you a productive, wonderful, and meaningful week. Aloud. For more information, check out my website, caneel.com/podcast, CANEEL, caneel.com/podcast, where you can find tons of resources, new episodes, show notes, transcripts, videos, all that good stuff to deepen your learning experience. Also follow me on social. Send me your feedback there. Ask me your questions. I'm caneel.is on Instagram and at Caneel on Twitter. Aloud. You are allowed to be whole.